being buried in cat excrements. This footage was taken as part of my forensic job, and I was given permission to use it here. That is why you'll see some blurred out serial numbers and documents here and there. Anyway, we've got 3 guns found in a medium-sized flat crammed full of cats, over 20 kept in miserable conditions. After hygiene services were deployed and the cats rescued, 3 guns and a few hundred rounds of ammunition were found buried in a pile of cat excrements. Now, why would somebody do this? This is the worst gun of the lot. It's an old Bernardelli semi-automatic pistol. It is the worst corroded gun I've ever shown on this channel, and certainly the stinkiest, but we'll see if there's something that can be recovered from it. Needless to say, this is a solid block held stuck together by rust, so the only way I can check if it's loaded or not is with a cleaning rod. But the barrel was so full of oxides that I couldn't even slide one there, so I had to resort to some spring wire, and luckily the chamber came out to be empty. Just look at the sheer amount of corrosion here. So much rust was produced that it bolts to slide outwards. I used the same technique on the second gun, with the same outcome. It is a Beretta Model 92-ish, where the ish stands from the fact that it's one of the clones made by Beretta for the Italian civilian market, back when 9mm Luger was banned. It was called Model 98, and this specimen is chambered for 30 Luger. The chunks missing from the frame are the effect of aluminum corrosion, a phenomenon that doesn't happen in normal conditions, but can happen in more aggressive environments like seawater. Similarly, this stainless steel Smith & Wesson revolver gives us a clear glimpse of what stainless corrosion looks like. This one seems loaded and actually got me scared for a second, but what you see are just snap caps. And to cap it all, here come the stinkiest ammo boxes you'll ever find. The paper boxes are literally soaked in dried up cat urine, and I think the smell would upset Nailbraid himself. Looking at the bright side, I now have some beautiful blue cartridges that kind of remind those fake lighter restoration videos on YouTube. You can only imagine the stench of non-neutered Tomcat coming off of this thing. I tried searching literature for other cases where firearm ammunition was used in the guise of kitty litter, but maybe not surprisingly I didn't find any. So this finding arouses some scientific interest, albeit not a judicial one. You see, brass and copper alloys in general are known for being quite resistant to corrosion. Just think of the Riachi bronzes, 2,500 years old statues recovered at sea in 1972, still standing proud with their definitely not small willies in pristine condition. However, KTP stands to copper just like kryptonite stands to Superman. Many nitrogen-containing compounds react with copper to form colorful salts, and guess what? Urine is the way most animals get rid of nitrogen-containing waste. There are 3 main shades of color here: turquoise, light blue, and dark blue. I think the dark blue is a tetramine copper salt, the turquoise is maybe basic copper carbonate, and I don't really know about the light blue. In any case, there's a lot of stress corrosion cracking, and almost all of the cartridges were cracked, with some even falling apart as I handled them. There's nothing that can be recovered here. Let's move to the guns. I decided to start with worst, the Bernardelli. When you find guns in this state, your goal is to strip them down completely, and the only option here is derusting, and making a 5 to 10% solution of citric acid together with some dish soap. After about 90 minutes, the external rust lamps start falling apart, and I'm scraping them off to get rid of as much corrosion products as I can. I don't really know where rust ends and poo begins, to be honest. I prepare some fresh solution and let the gun sit in it for a few more hours. At this point, we start seeing some bare metal, and I thought I could try removing the grips. The screw is under great tension, and having a slot head, it's easy to mess it up. In these desperate situations, I get the help of a vise with a soft jaw. If we're lucky, the screw rotated. If not, I obliterated the head. Luckily, it was the former. I did the same thing to the other grip, and there's a surprise under this one. There is an area that is perfectly preserved. This is an example of what I was talking about when I said that finding a gun, in this case you can still see some decades-old grease. Unfortunately though, the rest of the gun wasn't as lucky, and at this point I highly doubt this thing will ever fire again. I couldn't even manage to get the magazine out. I'm also taking the leap to answer those of you that often ask why I don't use electrolysis for derusting. Well, here's why. I hook the gun to the negative terminal of a power supply. Let's look at what is happening. First, there's a lot of bubbling going on near the gun. That is hydrogen gas being reduced on the metal surface. Some alloys, especially high-strength steels, are susceptible to hydrogen embrittlement that can arise in this situation. Also, look at how bubbles are forming on the side of the gun facing the opposite electrode and not on the other one. Electrolysis is a directional process, and you can clearly see on the plate I used as positive electrode. This means that even if I surrounded the gun with positive electrodes, I would still get and held much better to corrosion thanks to the polymer coating of all the steel parts other than the barrel. So I tried to take it apart without derusting, using penetrating oil only. While we try to do that, look at the frame. It is made out of anodized aluminum alloy, probably of the 7000 series, meaning it is alloyed with magnesium and zinc. It is the strongest type of aluminum alloy, but unfortunately this somewhat limits the corrosion resistance in very aggressive environments. For this reason, a hard anodizing treatment is done to protect it, as well as coloring it black. However, once corrosion makes it through the anodizing in one spot, it starts eating away the underlying material, resulting in this typical cratered look. The aluminum base plate of the magazine was completely dissolved, so that only rust was holding the spring in place. Once I got rid of that, I went for the cartridge follower, but couldn't get it out. This is bad news. It means the magazine was deformed inwards by the expansion of corrosion products, and taking it out will be a colossal pain. There's no way I can manage this without derusting, so here we go again. I'm also dipping in the Smith & Wesson revolver, since that's stuck solid as well, and the Bernardelli for the umpteenth time. The next morning, I woke up to an unpleasant surprise. That King's thing you see in the revolver grip used to be the Hammer leaf spring, and now it's in two pieces. I did a bit of research and found out that on their stainless guns, Smith & Wesson uses stainless steel even for the leaf springs, and some of these are susceptible to stress corrosion cracking if they're kept under tension in an aggressive environment. Probably the low pH of the back to the Beretta. Since it's a short recoil operated gun, I can hit the barrel directly to get the slide back a bit. Once I got that first movement between slide and frame, I needed to detach the slide from the barrel, and for that I have to hit it directly. Look at that red ring of rust around the barrel, that's what was causing so much friction. While I figure out a way of extracting the old magazine, let's see if we manage to get the revolver any looser. The only chance I have to open the cylinder without breaking this thing is by acting manually on the trigger group. I was able to get 2 out of 3 screws out with good manners, but on the third one I screwed up, excuse the pun, and had to drill it out. And look at the state of that trigger group after seasoning with some premium feline juice. Notice how on stainless steel, corrosion takes the form of localized groups of deep pits surrounded by healthy material. On the trigger and hammer, however, the corrosion appears more widespread, and that is usually due to them being made of a slightly less noble alloy than the rest, and through the magic of galvanic corrosion, they get corroded instead of the more noble surrounding material. In any case, having removed the side plate, the hammer is no longer squeezed by the expansion of rust, and I finally managed to get it moving again. Time to swing out the cylinder, and that's quite a big deal. First of all, I need to delicately activate the cylinder release mechanism. With some equally gentle measures, I convince the cylinder to open. Reassured by the success, and with my trusty 2-pound hammer, it was time to face the Beretta's magazine. The first thing to do is removing the obstacle caused by the aluminum oxides. These are much harder to dissolve chemically without damaging the underlying metal, and as a consequence of that, the citric acid bath didn't even touch it. You can see it clearly by the fact that the anodizing, also made of aluminum oxide, looks exactly the same as before. For this reason, my only option was to get rid of it mechanically. Ideally, you pull the magazine from the bottom instead of pushing it from the top, but our furry friends made this a far from ideal situation, so I had to get rid of a few extra bits to have access to the mouth of the magazine. See, the problem in doing this kind of stuff is that I'm often forced to disassemble parts in the wrong order, and even after I managed to do it, I still couldn't get the magazine out. But you know what? According to the principle of conservation of bad luck, if on one hand aluminum makes undissolvable oxides, on the other it has a thermal expansion coefficient that is twice as much that of steel. Heating up the whole thing to about 100 degrees C will cause the frame to expand twice as much as the magazine, and this greatly reduces friction between the two. Sorry for not getting the best footage, but I had to act quickly. By now you know how things work with rustic parts. Once you get a tiny movement, you're done. That white powder you see is some of the product of aluminum corrosion that was stuck between magazine and frame. This is what is left of the magazine, of course unsalvageable. Here the aluminum corrosion was so deep that you can see through the frame. Now, before reassembling the gun, let's look at the condition of the bore. Seeing a puff of red dust coming out while brushing a barrel is not exactly a good sign. However, there's corrosion damage only near the muzzle, while the rest is pretty much untouched, being less exposed to our four-legged friends. Overall, this barrel is safe to shoot. For the revolver, things are slightly different. While the barrel is still in great shape, some chambers of the cylinder have some deep pitting on their outer surface that can weaken them. If these had been on the inside surface, the most stressed one, the chambers wouldn't be safe to fire. Being on the outside, reducing the operating pressure a bit should compensate for the weakened structure. For this reason, I'll only be attempting to use 38 special loads in it, since the operating pressure is half that of the 357 Magnum. At this point, both the Beretta and Smith & Wesson are clean and reassembled. It's worth repeating that I didn't make any attempt at doing a restoration on these. All I had to do was seeing if they could be operated and shot. For the Bernardelli, this was certainly not the case. After days of work, I managed to get rid of most of the accessible corrosion products, but there are still enough in the crevices that keep the parts seized up. Also, the extent of corrosion was so large that many parts have been thinned out to the point of becoming unserviceable, and any further disassembly attempt will most likely end up in damage. For the first time on this channel, this gun won't be able to fire. Now let's look at the other two. The Smith & Wesson experienced some cylinder rotation stiffness, and some shots required helping the cylinder revolve by hand. Here I'm loading the Beretta's magazine. Notice how this gun is chambered for 30 Luger, which is the ammo I'm loading, but the gun architecture was kept essentially identical to that of 9mm, and this caused a lot of reliability issues, even without exposure to cat manure. Not surprisingly then, the Beretta required cycling by hand for each shot, being no longer able to extract the spent casing and chambering a new round on its own. Of course, the extensive corrosion damage is mostly responsible for that, but Beretta 92s chambered in 30 Luger were prone to jamming even when new, because of the lighter weight of the 30 Luger bullet compared to 9mm, which would have required a dedicated lighter slide.